You probably think you already understand how a gold rush mining claim worked. A man heard there was gold in California, reached a river, staked a piece of ground, bought a pan, and if he was lucky enough, the land paid him back in glittering metal. It sounds simple because the image is simple. A claim looks small. The tools look basic. Gold looks like instant money. But if you had actually been the one trying to keep that claim operating, the arithmetic would have turned on you very fast. Because the real story was never sitting in the pan. It was buried in the ledgers behind the claim, in the supply lines, the water systems, the labor market, and the daily cost of turning earth into cash. In 1852 alone, California's gold fields produced about $81 million in gold, according to later historical tallies based on contemporary records. $81 million. In 1 year. That number is the trap. It makes the whole rush look richer, easier, more rational than it really was. It encourages the viewer to think in totals instead of margins, in jackpots instead of operating expenses. And mining claims lived or died on margins. Before the rush, California was not some mature, well-supplied American business environment waiting to be activated. It had just come out of war. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed on February 2, 1848, transferring California from Mexico to the United States, but institutional control on the ground was thin. Research on the mining camps notes that the region had no functioning legislature, no real bureaucracy, no settled legal code in practice, and very limited enforcement capacity. In other words, thousands of people were about to rush into a place where property rights, contract enforcement, and supply systems were all underbuilt. Rigid rule, hard constraint. The population numbers matter here. Historical summaries put California's population before the rush at roughly 6,500 Californios, around 700 foreigners, and about 150,000 Native Americans. The non-native population was tiny. Then gold was found at Sutter's Mill on January 24, 1848, and the whole balance broke. By 1849, according to PBS's American Experience, California's non-native population had risen to almost 100,000. That is not normal growth. That is economic shock. So before a miner even asked whether his claim was rich, he was already operating inside a frontier inflation machine. Every hand that could cook, hammer, haul, build, ferry, or sell was being pulled toward the same narrow corridor of opportunity. Colonel Richard B. Mason, the military governor who toured the diggings in 1848, reported that even essential workers were scarce. Captain Sutter, he wrote, was paying a wagon maker and a blacksmith $10 a day. Merchants were paying $100 a month per room in his fort. A two-story house rented as a hotel for $500 a month. This was before the rush even fully peaked. And the state was not neutral in its effects. Native communities absorbed the most catastrophic burden. PBS summarizes that roughly 120,000 Native Americans died of disease, starvation, and homicide during the gold rush era. Foreign miners were pushed out by violence, harassment, and eventually taxation. California's 1850 Foreign Miners License Law imposed a $20 monthly tax on non-U.S. miners. $20 a month. Later versions were reduced, but the structure remained discriminatory. Primary source commentary from the period described thousands leaving the southern mines and businesses collapsing around them. So even at the level of law, a claim was never just an economic unit. It sat inside a system of exclusion. Which brings us to the real question. How does a gold rush mining claim actually make money once you subtract what it costs to keep the claim alive? The cleanest way to understand it is to use three ledgers. First, access. Can you secure workable ground and hold it long enough to profit from it? Second, throughput. Can you move enough dirt, gravel, and water through the claim every day to make the operation productive? Third, leakage. How much of the value leaks back out through prices, wages, transport, taxes, debt, theft, injury, time, and declining yields? If those three ledgers line up, a claim works. If one breaks, it doesn't matter how much gold the district produces in total. Your claim still fails. Start with the first version of the business, the one most people imagine. The early placer claim in 1848 and 1849. Surface gold was relatively accessible. A miner could work stream beds with a pan, then with a rocker, also called a cradle, and if the ground was good enough, the return could look extraordinary. Mason's report described individual yields ranging from 1 to 3 ounces of gold per man per day, with 2 ounces considered an ordinary yield in some localities. He saw a party of 4 averaging $100 a day. He recorded examples of 2 men pulling $17,000 worth of gold in 7 days, and another ravine yielding upward of $12,000. Total production in the diggings, he estimated, might already be $30,000 to $50,000 a day. Numbers like that launched a continent. Here's what nobody told you. Those figures described pockets of rich ground, not the average economics of running a claim over time. California state parks, using classroom material based on period prices, puts the more typical miner much lower. Most miners, it says, found only $10 to $15 worth of gold dust a day. 10 to 15. Not a typo. That is still real money in 1851, but now compare it with the cost structure around it. The same material lists flour at $13 a bag, rice at $8 a pound, beef at $10 a pound, butter at $20 a pound, cheese at $25 a pound, boots at $6 a pair, and a shovel at $36. Eggs rose from $1 to $2 to $3 each. So your first ledger, Access, may have looked cheap. No heavy machinery, no corporate charter. Maybe just a pan, a shovel, a pick, and a claim recognized by the other miners around you. But the second and third ledgers were already attacking you. Throughput was limited by muscle. Leakage was extreme. Food, tools, shelter, replacement clothing, transport, and downtime all cost far more than new arrivals expected. Even the gold pan that had cost about 20 cents before 1849 was soon selling for $8. A pan, $8. And this is why the romance of the independent prospector hides the actual business logic. By any conventional analysis, a frontier full of men literally pulling gold from rivers should have made miners the richest people in the territory. It didn't. Merchants did spectacularly well. Samuel Brannan, who famously publicized the discovery instead of digging for gold himself, was reportedly selling as much as $5,000 a day in goods to miners. And California State Parks notes he made more than $2,000 a day. That is the operating truth in one comparison. The miner faced variable output and fixed living costs. The merchant sold certainty into desperation. It got worse when you factor in opportunity cost. University of Missouri's Historical Wage Guide, drawing on period sources, notes that laborers in California could earn about $1 an hour, skilled mechanics $12 to $20 a day, and carpenters actually struck because $12 a day felt too low. They wanted $16. The same guide cites miners earning $8 to $16 a day, while dinner at a principal San Francisco hotel could cost $8 to $12. So even outside the mines, wages were soaring. If your claim was mediocre, the rational move might not be to keep digging. It might be to work for someone else, or to sell to miners instead of competing with them. Then came the second version of the business. The easy surface pickings thinned. The claim stopped being only a question of finding gold and became a question of processing volume. Pan work gave way to the rocker, then the long tom, then the sluice box. According to the hydraulic mining history collected by the Central Pacific Railroad Museum Archive, this evolution happened quickly between 1849 and 1852. Each new tool let miners wash more gravel faster. That sounds like progress. It was. But it also meant the claim was changing shape economically. A man with a pan could operate almost entirely with his own labor. A team with a rocker or long tom needed coordination, water, more timber, more maintenance, more time spent setting up and clearing debris. The output per day might improve, but so did the need for working capital. Which brings us back to access. In the early camps, claim rights were created and enforced locally by miners themselves, not by a developed state. Legal historians emphasize that these were not broad, permanent fee-simple rights in the modern sense. They were narrow, camp-based rights to work particular ground under local rules. Tight rights, temporary by design. That mattered because a claim could be profitable only if you held it through the period when new methods made it worth more. If you lacked supplies, got sick, ran out of money, or lost labor, your claim could become somebody else's opportunity. And miners did get sick. Contemporary accounts describe men wading in freezing streams, living on poor diets, losing fingernails, suffering infection, malnutrition, and accidents. The claim did not merely consume cash. It consumed bodies. Then water itself became a business input with its own politics. As sluicing expanded, miners needed more reliable flows, and ditches and flumes were built to bring water from nearby creeks, and then from farther away. Once that happened, a claim's profitability depended less on what was under your feet and more on whether you could afford the system feeding it. If water arrived late, or not at all, your day's production disappeared. If a ditch company charged too much, or you could not settle the bill, the gold in the gravel might as well not exist. The CPRR hydraulic mining history notes that over time many miners actually lost claims to water companies for non-payment of water bills. That is not the classic image of a gold rush, but it is the business. Here's the problem. The more miners improved their claims, the more those claims stopped behaving like simple fines and started behaving like infrastructure-dependent firms. Now move to the third version of the mining claim, the one that explains why so many small operators faded out. Hydraulic mining took methods that had begun as ground sluicing and scaled them into a capital system. Water was diverted into ditches and flumes at high elevations and then forced through heavy pipes and monitors powerful enough, as the Oakland Museum of California explains, to blast streams 400 to 500 feet. One exhibit summary describes the water erupting from the nozzle with a force of 5,000 pounds. At that point, the claim is barely a hole in a creek bank anymore. It is a hydraulically powered, earth-moving operation, and the numbers became industrial. The CPRR Museum history estimates that hydraulic mining yielded over $100 million in gold during the roughly 30 years before the 1884 injunction. PBS gives another measure. Large mining companies extracted $170 million in gold between 1860 and 1880 using hydraulic methods. $170 million. And yet that wealth was not produced by lone prospectors kneeling in streams. It came from consolidated ownership, long ditches, mountain reservoirs, iron pipe, expensive tunnels for debris, and wage labor. By the late 1860s, that same CPRR history says, hydraulic mining had evolved into a business of big capital and wage labor. So apply the three ledgers again. Access now meant controlling not just a patch of auriferous ground, but the legal and financial ability to consolidate claims. Throughput meant moving entire hillsides through sluices. Leakage meant something new. Debt, bankrupt ditch companies, maintenance on long water systems, and legal exposure to downstream damage. The CPRR history says the industry consolidated into fewer than 24 large stock companies dominating the best diggings in several counties from the 1860s through the early 1880s. That is a familiar pattern. Once scale starts to matter, ownership narrows. And scale did matter. The same source notes that year-round hydraulic operations required 100-mile ditch systems and mountain reservoirs. Hard rock tunnels had to be driven to carry debris away. Drift mining into buried gravel beds was costly and risky. Many ditch companies themselves went bankrupt as competition lowered water prices and systems were consolidated. So even large operators were not swimming in effortless profit. They were balancing capital intensity against uncertain returns. A rich claim could still fail if the system around it was too expensive. This is the turning point most people miss. The gold rush did not simply run out of gold. It changed the cost of reaching gold. That is a different thing. By any conventional analysis, the move from hand tools to giant hydraulic monitors should have solved the profitability problem. More water, more volume, more gold. It didn't. It postponed the problem by enlarging it. Hydraulic mining turned geology into revenue. Yes, but it also turned landscape destruction into a deferred liability. The Oakland Museum of California estimates that hydraulic monitors blasted 1.5 billion cubic yards of soil and rock from the Sierra hillsides. 1.5 billion cubic yards. The debris buried streams, damaged fisheries, choked rivers, and flooded farmland downstream. And human cost kept traveling with the balance sheet. Farmers lost land under silt. River navigation suffered. Valley orchards and grain fields flooded. Primary accounts from the 1870s and 1880s describe a direct conflict between miners and farmers over who would absorb the cost of mining debris. Which brings us to the final leakage event. The state eventually intervened. On January 7, 1884, Judge Lorenzo Sawyer effectively ended the old model by prohibiting the dumping of mining debris where it could reach navigable rivers or farmland. The famous injunction did not ban desire. It banned a cost transfer. So what was the hidden mechanism that determined whether a gold rush mining claim actually worked? It was not simply the richness of the ground. It was control over throughput, control over water, labor, time, and transport. The winner was not necessarily the person who found gold first. Often it was the person who could feed men, finance tools, extend credit, secure water, survive low-yield days, and hold the claim through the transition from shallow diggings to industrial extraction. In the earliest stage, that could be a storekeeper like Brannan. In the later stage, it was often a stock company. Once you see that, a lot of famous details fall into place. Masons report that two men could pull $17,000 in 7 days, and that overall production might be $30,000 to $50,000 daily makes sense as a shock event. So does his report that flour already costs $36 a barrel and would soon be $50? Those are not separate stories. They are the same story. High output in one place created scarcity everywhere else. Even military discipline buckled. Mason noted that 26 soldiers deserted from Sonoma, 24 from San Francisco, and 24 from Monterey. Labor was fleeing ordinary institutions because the mines distorted every price signal in reach. The same pattern explains why early mining camps created tight local claim rules. When there is little formal government and a great deal of competition, people invent practical property rights fast. It explains why foreign miners were taxed out, why native communities were devastated, why wages for mechanics exploded, why merchants flourished, why partnerships formed, why water companies gained leverage, and why corporate consolidation followed. A mining claim was never just a lucky patch of dirt. It was a node inside a volatile economy. And that is why the usual question, did miners get rich, is too blunt. Some did. Very early arrivals on rich placer ground sometimes made astonishing returns. Mason saw enough to confirm that. But the average claim was an operating business under pressure, and most businesses under that kind of pressure do not become legends. They become break-even stories, debt stories, injury stories, or quiet exit stories. California State Parks says most miners found only $10 to $15 in gold dust per day. Repeat that next to $3 eggs, $36 shovels, and $13 flour, and the myth starts to wobble. The claim also changed what success meant. In 1848, success might mean finding rich surface gold before the crowd arrived. By 1851, it might mean securing enough supplies to outlast bad weeks. By the mid-1850s, PBS notes, gold mining had become less an individual enterprise and more a wage labor job. That sentence is the obituary for the original dream. Not sudden, procedural, quietly final. So when people imagine the economics of running a gold rush mining claim, they usually picture revenue first and cost second. They should reverse that order. Revenue was visible. Cost was decisive. Gold pulled men into California, but operating expenses sorted them once they arrived. Some claims were productive. Some were spectacular. Most sat under the same rule every extractive business eventually discovers. The resource matters, but the cost of extracting it matters more, especially after the easy material is gone. And if there is a lesson in that, it is a simple one. Whenever an economy starts selling the public a dream of easy treasure, pay less attention to the glitter at the surface and more attention to who controls the tools, the transport, the water, the credit, and the right to dump the bill on everyone downstream.